thank everyone for joining this morning. This is Fall 1 Data Population Live Training. I'm Nathaniel Holmes. My co-host today is Kyron Pagulayan. We'll be presenting, and Marshall will be pulling the strings and running everything in the background. So if there's any technical problems, we're all just going to blame Marshall. I'm very comfortable with that. This is a training that we've been doing for years. We used to call it Essential 3, and it's a preparation for the Fall 1 reporting submission. We're going to go over the different record types that are required, and then we're going to demonstrate using online maintenance and online maintenance only in this session of what's needed and how the process is done. There is a batch file version. We have one more training left that we're going to demonstrate doing the batch file submission, but we like to do both. One, because batch file allows you to see how you would be performing the work most likely. But online maintenance does a couple of things. It allows us to go field by field. And while you have to be able to translate the field requirements and map them to your local systems, we can describe the different codes in online maintenance. We can describe the different fields. We certainly couldn't go one by one and try to do that with every student information system, so that the onus falls upon all of you to be able to translate which field is which, like the enrollment status code. I don't know if that's the name of the field in your student information system, but you'd have to know the difference. Or like the TK grade level code, if your student information system uses TK grade level, we don't have that grade level in CALPADS. So there's different code mapping that you have to be able to do. And the second thing is, whenever CALPADS is inundated with high use, we all know the system performance has a lot left to be desired. And it's advantageous sometimes to be able to update a single record or a single field in a record on online maintenance as opposed to a file submission. This is extremely beneficial towards the end of the submission near the deadline. But, like I said, if it's a small change you have to make to a single student, this is the way to do it. And then any demographic changes to that student's record pertaining to the name or the race or ethnicity, it's good to know how to do that. And so online demonstration provides us a mechanism of that. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. And so we just threw this slide in because we're kind of going in a new direction. We started last year and end of year, and the focus now of our training is less, this is what you do, this is where you do it, but more, this is the information you need. These are the resources you have. This is how a similar situation can be resolved. We want to give you tools and mechanisms as opposed to instructions for a specific error or a specific procedure. We want you to be able to develop your own procedures, find and correct your own problems, map the data to your local systems, and all of this will allow you to gather and maintain data more effectively. So we hope that this training gives you all the confidence and the knowledge of where the resources are, so that you can be independent and use the service desk, so much as although we say it's the first line of support, maybe it's the last means for assistance for you, because a lot of the tools and information you have is readily available. And then something that we definitely want to stress in this training is critical thinking is very important in CALPADS. I think a lot of times administration thinks this is just data entry, but it's so much more than that, because there's so many business rules in play. The data is used throughout multiple different systems. It has financial implications. Really understanding how the different business rules and field requirements are going to benefit or impact your LEA is important. You're not just trying to submit data to certify it. You really want to understand what's the significance. And it goes more than just, like we said, there's financial implications, but ultimately the whole point of this data collection and assessments and accountability is to make sure that we're providing the best education the students can have, right? And we want them all to have some equitable means to a fair education. So we really want to be able to conceptualize the impact of changes as they're presented, solve problems, and just be able to consistently complete the submission in a reasonable time frame. So that's the kind of direction and the aim of training now. And so this has gone unchanged, right? We always like to go over the training sequence. So if you're new, Fall 1 data population is right after your basic introduction to CALPADS. The student profile will impact CALPADS throughout the year. And so this is your opportunity to build out the student's profile. Once we do the Fall 1 data population, the next set of trainings, which Advance has already started, is for the experienced users. But next Thursday, Kyra and I present the first reporting and certification. And so the data that you're populating into your into CALPADS from your student information systems now will be captured in reports, and we talk about the process of that and how to review those reports and the key data points in Fall 1 reporting and certification. And so we do have objectives for today's training, as always. And by the end of today's training, we hope that we can give you the ability to be able to identify the different file types expected to be reported for Fall 1. We hope that you can determine which SIS and fields mapping to the CALPADS file specifications, so you can go between your system locally and CALPADS and verify the data points. You have the confidence to perform the submission process either through batch file or online maintenance. Of course, again, today is online maintenance. And then along those lines, you have the confidence and mechanisms to be able to resolve errors independently. And so, we're going to get to the end of today's training. We're going to do a wrap up. If you can think about these things that we hope, to be able to share with you, when you fill out the survey, you can tell us your level of confidence and be able to accomplish these, or more important than the survey, if you don't think that you can perform the submission, or we didn't resolve the errors in a way that you can translate and repeat, bring that to our attention and we can do a Q&A. And so, this is the information that we expect to be able to deliver and that you can grasp. And if we fail, at the end of training, we can revisit anything. So just keep that in mind. And so this is where I get to share the presenting duties with Kyron, go over the documents.
As Nate alluded earlier, to be effective with CALPADS submissions, you have to consider those attributes of an effective CALPADS administrator or CALPADS coordinator. And part of that, of course, is to empower you to be able to have those tools and also to be able to be aware of all of the current conditions, requirements, business rules that we require you to meet. And so with that, as trainers, it's our responsibility to show you where you could gather all of the information. So if you're new to CALPADS, CALPADS is a daunting task if you look at it at the first glance. However, the secret to CALPADS is not knowing everything. It's just knowing where to find things, where to get the information from. Because CALPADS is a ever-changing system. You'd be comfortable with the system this month. And then, in March, we might change it and switch to a different process. And so to be able to keep up with all of these changes, it would be best for you to know where to locate these changes, what documents, what sites to look at, rather than trying to take notes, getting all of this and trying to get it in your head in a short span of time. So with that, there are tools that you could take advantage of. First of all is, if you're in CALPADS, you have the help section here, and you have the system documentation, the error list that would help you be able to figure out the different errors that you might get during submission and also during certification. And then you have your batch file templates download. And if you needed help, you can always click on the service request and ask us help. And if you want Nate to answer your question directly, put his name in the title. But anyway, that's just a way to get in touch with us and also be able to get the information you need. At the bottom too, you have your data guide. You have some documentation section here. So you have your data guide, SSID enrollment procedures, and then you have the valid code combos, error lists, the CALPADS FAQ, and current known issues. All of this, if you click it, is either linked to the website, to the CALPADS CD website, or to a section in the CALPADS user manual. And so speaking of the user manual, you could go there by clicking on user manual. If you don't have access to CALPADS, at this time, you can just Google CALPADS user manual and it should bring this up. So the CALPADS user manual is a way to, this is a way to consolidate all of the essential things that you'll need to effectively use the system. So I would recommend is clicking on the Fall 1 roadmap. If you're new to CALPADS, this would give you a framework or some expectations of what you need to do for Fall 1. This is just a summary, and you have here the dates, suggested milestones, the different communications, and then you have the different files to submit, and then some short business rules, and then other stuff that we think might help you along the way during this Fall 1 submission. Also, in the user manual, if you go to help and then troubleshoot, you have access to the error list as well. You could download the spreadsheet or click on each error. And then you could also search for that within the user manual search page. So take advantage of this if you also want to have to access the Wednesday Q&A. The user manual has a link to that. You just click on this and it should bring up the Zoom session for Wednesday's Q&A. So take advantage of that. And the next part is the CALPADS system documentation page. So this is the one that CDE maintains. So this is the CALPADS system documentation. So you have your CALPADS homepage, and then it gives you the calendar, which we also have in the user manual, communications. So if you want to look at latest flash updates about announcements, you can go here. You can also go, if you go to the FAQs, and also subscribe to the listserv. This is an important section you need to, or task you need to do. You have to subscribe to the listserv. That way you have a first-hand information that's being sent out by CDE or by the CSIS office if there are any issues, or if there's a message we want you guys to know. So subscribe to this. This is just a one-way listserv. It just keeps you informed with what's going on in CALPADS. Another thing is the CSIS website. So this is our website, csis.ficmat.org. The CSIS website also provides you access to all the PowerPoint documentation that we have. So if you click on resources, you could download the latest PowerPoints we have. And if you click find, it gives you, it expands that page and gives you all of the prior PowerPoints we have throughout the year. Let's say if you're new to CALPADS and you don't have a Bridge account yet, I'm sure you guys already have one because you're here and you've registered for the session. But if someone has to have a Bridge account, an LEA is accorded 2 users for Bridge. So have them go to CALPADS, click on Learning and LMS, and then request an LMS account. That is if you have, if only one has a Bridge account within your district and you want to share that responsibility as well to someone else. Okay. Last but not the least is the CSIS YouTube channel. So all of the videos that we have compiled throughout the years to guide you in all of those functionalities can be accessed here. So when we sent you the email about the registration, we expected you to have viewed the CALPADS Fall 1 data population training. So this is basically a compilation of the specific file types that we will be discussing today. So today is just a summary where we'll just try to put together all of these file types and the relationships. But if you want to have specific requirements, or the specific requirements for each field, I would suggest you watch each of this if you're new to CALPADS, and you would see why this field is required and what are the other conditions when this field is populated. So please bookmark this. And also, Marshall would love this if I say punch the subscribe button. That way, if we have updated videos, then you should be able to be notified and be alerted of new videos or new Q&A recordings that would be uploaded every week. And that's for the survival kit. And so we move on to the agenda. As we mentioned, we'll have an overview of all the file types, all of the general requirements, 10,000 foot view of the CALPAD system. And then for this session, we'll be doing a demo for online maintenance. And then we will be wrapping up that session. So part of Fall 1 is establishing the student profile. So as you can see here, the student profile is composed of the SENR file, the SINF, SELA, SPRG, SPED, and SSRV files. So these are the core files, basic files that you have to establish at the start of the year to gain ownership of a student and to be able to submit succeeding files throughout the academic year, throughout all the different submissions. So in the order that is listed here, the SENR, you have to submit that first to gain ownership of the student. And then later on, once you have the SENR, you can then submit the SINF, your SELA, and so on and so forth. So as a Fall 1 or a CIS coordinator, this is your responsibilities to submit your SENR, SINF, SELA, SPRG. The SPED and SSRV will come from your special education system, which would be pushed by your SPED coordinator or your SELPA if they're the ones who maintain the records. Okay. So as I've mentioned, you have here your SENR. This is your base file, and this gives you ownership of the student. When we say ownership, meaning if a student transfers from one school to another or one district to another, you claim ownership and you establish the enrollment of that student in your district. And so that then creates ownership, and that allows you to be able to submit all supporting documents to CALPADS. So the next files are the SINF, SELA, and SPRG. So the SINF will contain your demographics and also your address that would be essential in state matching and all of those stuff. And so these three files, the SL4, the SENR, SINF, SELA, and SPRG, as I've mentioned, will come from your school information system, whatever SIS you have. The SSRV and the SPED will come from your special education system and other special education systems. And as I've mentioned, the student profile data, since it's the core data that you have to establish at the start of the year. As we go through the different submissions throughout the year, you then add additional information related to the student. So if the student was EL in Fall 1, you reported them, or they were tested and they were identified as EL, then in Fall 2, you have to submit the courses, and you also have to identify if the courses they are in is providing EL services. And then in end of year 1, you will then, for those grades 9 to 12, you report those who completed courses, departmental courses, and then who are CTE pathway completers. And then for EOI 2, this is another flavor of the SPRG file where you'll be submitting program participation. And then end of year 3 would include discipline, STAS, which is the absence summary of those students enrolled during the year. And then EOI 4 would be your second time you will be updating your students' SPED and SSRV to make it more current based on the collection period. Okay, so here is the 10,000 foot view of CALPADS reporting. As I've mentioned, you have your SIS, and you have your special education system. So the thing that jumpstarts everything is you collecting all of the pertinent data that is relevant to the student to be reported in CALPADS. So you store that in the SIS, and then you then extract the first file, which is the SENR, which contains a student's SSID if you already have the student enrolled before, or if the student requires a SSID to be generated, you only have the name, all of those demographic information, basic information, and submit that to CALPADS. Then within CALPADS, as Nate will demo later on, CALPADS will then determine if a student has a match within the system, or if the student does not have a match, and that would require you to generate a new SSID. And so once you generate a new SSID, you can then extract that information, send it back to your SIS, And then the SIS will then pick up the SSID associated to the student you have within your system. Your SIS will then create the different supporting files for your SINF, your SELA, or your SPRG files. And also, once you request that extract from CALPADS, it will also identify if the student is special ed, which will then alert you to tell your special ed coordinator to send the SPED and SSRV files to CALPADS. Okay, so once all of those files are in CALPADS, CALPADS is like a database that then is being used to generate all of these other reports and also be used in state matching. So CALPADS will determine if a student is directly certified. Those are the students who are receiving SNAP, TANF, or medical benefits that would then be identified as DC students. And then TOMS, based on the SELA record that you're submitting, if a student is TBD, then that information will also be sent to TOMS, and TOMS will then alert ELPAC, and that would then the student will then be included in the roster for initial ELPAC testing at the start of the year. And once TOMS, if once a student gets tested and gets all of the results in, TOMS should then automatically generate the SELA status or the English language status of the student based on the results. So you have an EL or an IFEP record automatically sent by TOMS to CALPADS. You don't have to self-identify the student as EL or IFEP anymore. TOMS will do that for you. Okay. So another thing for CALPADS is that the CALPADS will be used also for state matching for foster youth. So meaning if you have a student, if you've posted those records, your relevant records to CALPADS, every week CALPADS will send this information to the CDSS, and in turn CDSS will let you know if the student is foster or not. So this is the whole data cycle of CALPADS, and this is just half of it because this is just the submission period or submission cycle. There would be a certification cycle later on, which we will be discussed next week in our reporting and certification. And so question is, how frequent should you submit information to CALPADS? Well, the answer is, as soon as you have the data, please submit it to CALPADS. As soon as you have your enrollment, as soon as you have any eligibilities for programs, submit it to CALPADS. However, of course, this is all based on the different factors like local enrollment procedures. So how do you manage the data? If your organization is an well-oiled or organization, you are able to gather information from different school sites. In a perfect world, be able to just push the button and send it to CALPADS, then that's well and good. However, most of you are wearing multiple hats, and so you have to juggle that as well. Bottom line is, if you have new information to share to CALPADS, please upload that to CALPADS. Okay, and then of course, local reporting needs. So right now, at the start of the year, we're having initial ELPAC testing, and also we want the student to be identified as directly certified. And so the earlier you submit the student enrollment and the student information and the SELA record, the earlier you would be able to test the students for ELPAC, the earlier the student would be identified for direct certification or foster youth and for SPED services as well. And so my point of emphasis is, you can probably do it once a week or twice a month, but then if you have the information now, do it. Because like for the ELPAC, if let's say you just submit your SELA record during October, then the student needs to be tested. Since EL and EL and IFEP would come from TOMS now. If the testing comes back later than census day, if the results comes back and the status is, let's say, 10-7, that student won't be accounted for. They won't be counted for the LCFF. So the sooner you submit your SELA, the sooner the student is tested, the sooner the status would be determined. And so, yeah, so as I've mentioned earlier, these are just the benefits that I've already mentioned or hinted on when I was discussing those things. And so we go to our demo. Basically, this PowerPoint is just a supplement to our demo. We won't be discussing the PowerPoint slide by slide. And so as we go through this demo, Nate will be touching on the important requirements for, let's say, student enrollment when he creates an SSID in online maintenance. Okay. Also, um, online maintenance is used if you're just adding, one record uh, of a student, or if you miss a student and you're just correcting stuff because you're getting a certification error. Online maintenance is something that we recommend. However, if you're a big school or a big LA and you want to do a mass upload, batch upload is the best way to submit data to CalPADS. And so with that, I give back the mic to Nate, who will demo the first two files, which is the SENR and the SINF.
So whenever you enroll a student, you always want to, verify that you have the correct SSID for your student. And so you have a search by SSID here and a quick search on the left in the navigation. Often when you're enrolling a new student, all you have is their demographic information. So you can perform a search by typing in demographic information. And if you have a new student, a kindergartner that's never been enrolled, perhaps it's a preschool student that's never been enrolled, you can type in their demographic information here. CalPADS will perform a match. And then if for some reason you're looking for a student, right, and you don't have much information, you can search by enrollment. And so you never have to select the LEA. We do because our account is a state level account. But you would type in the school and you could filter for grades or an enrollment period. And so this is an effective search. In the field, I can't tell you the practical use of it because you do have a student information system. But for us, sometimes looking for students, we can go here, or if we're trying to find for troubleshooting and we notice a problem with a file in second graders and we're trying to see who's enrolled, I can come here and I can get a list of everybody at a specific school at a specific grade level. So maybe you just use it for confirmation, but there is a search by enrollment. So let's come here and, we're enrolling, it's fall, so we're going to enroll our students for the new academic year. And you have the demographic information for a student. So in online maintenance, you could type it in, or if you were searching for a student, and then every field with the asterisks is required. And so if we were doing a lookup, there is no required. You type in whatever information you have, but if you're doing an enrollment, you can see that there's several fields required. And so this is the minimum amount of information that you can put into search. And so although the mechanism is a little bit different, the same requirements exist in batch files. So you can see that CalPADS used the demographic information and has found a student with similar information. And you have an SSID for that student that was already enrolled. There's a match score. CalPADS has determined that the match is 94.12% accurate or close. And you can see some of the information, right? And so it's important as you are routinely submitting data for your students to try to make it as complete as possible. If I had a student's middle name, I might want to include that as well. Or when I get to the student information, I want to include the student's demographic information. You can see in the case of this student, we have a birth date. That might help because if my student was born in California and not Colorado, I would know I have a different student. All right, but there's information you want to verify. So if this isn't enough, this is just a preview, right? You want to go and click the name of the student, and that will give you access to the student detail screen. And this is where you can view the student's profile. All this information is submitted in different records or files into CALPADS, and it's all specific to this student. Here's the enrollment record, the demographic information. And so I can see that I have race, ethnicity information here. If I open the record even more, I can scroll down, right? And I can see more race, ethnicity. Not only is my student Hmong, which was shown in the preview, but I can see that there's a little bit white in there, a little bit black in there. I can see the parents' names, and I can verify that to what I know about the student. I can see the birth city. So we're probably going to have most of our kids from California. That state alone usually isn't going to be enough. You look at the birth city. So you have to use this information to discern which student you have. Kyron likes to say hijacked SSID. And what that means is you've claimed an SSID for a student that is not your student. Once you create an enrollment record on an SSID that's not truly your student, you take ownership of that record. And that's a key point in CALPADS, because that means whoever really has that student cannot make any more changes to the record. You've hijacked it. You've commandeered that SSID. The problem on your part is once this is brought to your attention, you have to go through the tedious process of removing all the records associated to that student that you've inputted. And lastly, always lastly, is delete the enrollment. Because if you delete the enrollment first, all of these records will be orphaned and trigger errors. You need to have the enrollment record even to delete associated records. So always, if you ever hijack an SSID, I encourage you to submit a service ticket. I always say start from the bottom. And if there's no record, you don't worry about it, right? See how there's no record here? And then you work your way forward to the top so that the last thing you do is delete the enrollment if you've hijacked the SSID. And Kyron talks about anomalies, which that would create a mid or a reverse mid. In October, sign up for anomaly training. All right, so let's go back to enrolling a student. We're going to request an SSID. I've decided that that other student is not mine. As you know, San Francisco is such a common name. And so like I said, we've determined that this is not the student that we have. At the top, we have the option to create a new SSID. So I'm going to choose that option. A potential mid will be created. No, I'm sure it's not going to create a mid. It's a different student altogether. And so this is the SSID enrollment screen. So we'll just type in the birth country. Well, I guess we have to spell that. Birth state. And so this is also where you want to be careful, right? Because our web browsers save our form information. So, if you have credit card and you're trying to make a DoorDash payment, it might pop up here, California. You can't click it. You want to come over here to this arrow and select the code. So it'll say California, USCA. Because we get in the habit of auto population in these fields, you'll wonder why if you pick auto-populated California, when you come down to the city, sometimes you can't select the city in the student information you see down here. Or if you select the wrong country, you won't have an option to select the state because only the US, Canada, and Mexico have state province codes. So just make sure you don't auto-populate. You want to use the arrows to select basically the code. And then again, you won't have to do reporting LEA because it'll be associated to your account. However, you are going to have to pick the school of attendance for enrollment. And so all the different codes for your district are in here. So there is, even for every district, there's a district level code. So you can see that 9998152 is the same code over here. You might have a home hospital program. The district might be where you're doing your COVID independent study. So you want to be conscious of the district you choose for all, or the school of attendance. In addition to district code, there's always an NPS school code, right? Every district, every charter school, every LEA has an NPS group school code of 6 zeros followed by a 1. And then if you have any private school students on an ISP, you're going to use the private school group code of 6 zeros followed by a 2. Those are 3 common to every district. There's always a district code for school of attendance. There's always an NPS school code, and there's always a private school code. If you were to pick NPS school of attendance is conditionally validated. And the CDE has a form for all the certified NPS schools. If you don't know them, they're listed here. There's also a generic NPS school number. So if your school has not been certified, but you have a student on a IEP going to an NPS school, you can pick the generic NPS school code. And that's all 9s here: non-certified, non-public, non-sectarian school, and that would be the generic school code. For now, we're going to leave this field blank and enroll the student in a regular school within our district. So let me pick Emerson and Elementary. And then the local student ID, that comes from your student information system. It's whatever number that is assigned to the student for school purposes. And then, of course, birth city. And then enrollment status. This is a fairly important field. If you're responsible for a student's IEP services or they're receiving the majority of the instruction, the enrollment status is 10. Secondary enrollment is for supplemental instruction. Most often it's like when you have a student that is going to a secondary school for a specific program, or perhaps you have a 6th grader that's an excellent math student that goes to the middle school for math. Short-term enrollment is specifically for educational option schools. These are typical schools that might be at the district or the county level. They might be non-traditional, like a continuation school or a court school. Sometimes it's disciplinary reasons why you might be at a short-term enrollment. So this enrollment status will not validate against every school type. And then 40, receiving specialized services only. This code is out of date. You should never use it. Even though the word specialized is there, it has nothing to do with special education. This code was formerly used for KC instruction, those high school students who are coming back to graduate or were taking services to pass the KC. It has no practical purpose now in CALPADS. It's only there for historical updates. And then 59, ADA enrollment. The name alone is not great. And because there's a lot of students that we know do not generate ADA, but this is more regimented, it's more specific. It can only be used for private school enrollments and infants and toddlers. So your preschool students who may not be generating ADA, if they are on the IEP, they definitely have to be enrolled with a 10. And so I can tell you that, and you can trust me, but I'm just a dude named Nate, right? I work at CSIS. I may or may not know what I'm talking about. Kyron and Marshall like to say I don't know what I'm talking about. Marshall says I just make stuff up. So how do you verify that what I say is true, or how would you find that on your own, right? There's several different system documents. And so we'll go through the process of looking at some of this information. So I want to know the field specifications. And so a good document to be familiar with is the CALPADS file specifications forms. It's on the system documents page. It can be downloaded here. It's not in the footer, so I don't see it in the footer here, right? But if you go to help, I don't want to do too much because I don't want to redo all this. You have the user manual, and then you have system documents here. So you can always get your documents here. If you have the CALPADS user manual handy, it's in your references. And this is where you're going to get all the most updated documentation. If it's published at 12 p.m., typically Kyron can have it available on the web by the end of business, unless Kyron's out, and then we'll wait for Kyron to get back. But this is easily updated. Kyron takes personal responsibility for making sure that it's accurate and up to date. So this is the references section under resources, and the CALPADS user manual is a great location. So let's look again at the CFS. This is the file specification. So you have your SSID, student information, student program, so on and so forth. You have the ellipses if you want to cycle through more, right? But we're looking at enrollment. So let's go back to SSID enrollment. And we're looking for enrollment status. So I will expand this. Hopefully it's easy to read. And I will scroll for enrollment status, right? Here it is. You can also click data, filter. We can go to enrollment status code, and it will tell us a coded value representing the enrollment status, and enrollment status, the state of the student's enrollment, blah, 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 right? So it gives you a general indication. Sometimes the codes have comments, tell you how they're used. And then here are the validation rules. And so if enrollment status is 20 secondary, student exit reason can only be E170. So that's good to know. If I have a secondary enrollment, I can only use one record, right? Then it has grade level code. If the student has a non-ADA enrollment status code 50, the student exit reason must also be E170. If the enrollment status code equals to 50 non-ADA enrollment, the grade levels can only be, and so you see KN 1 through 12. Notice that PS isn't there, right? You can't use PS here. Also, if these are the grade levels, KN 1 through 12, also then the student must be a private school student. And so it's specifically, it's telling you what I've said, right? You have to have a private school student to use this enrollment status. And then there's another condition. If the grade level code is infant or toddler, the enrollment status must be 50. Is it required? Yes. And so this is a great place to go, right? It sometimes, and it's just knowing which documents to go to. You won't know all the rules. I don't know all the rules. I've been doing this 10 years, right? It's ridiculous to even try, but knowing what information is in which document really helps facilitate what we have to do. It makes the process faster. So if I want to know field specifications, because this is dictated by a business rule, you can also go to the CALPADS data guide. Let's pick a grade level for this student. Student was born in 2015, so we have, yeah, first grade. All right, and then enrollment start date. Let's just pick the 6th. And so we have other fields here, right? The enrollment exit date. I'm enrolling students, so I don't need an exit date. If I had an exit date, the exit reason would be required. Again, we're not exiting the student. The expected receiver of school attendance. That's if the student is transferring for disciplinary reasons, this field may be required, right? So expulsions, suspensions, if it's not a disciplinary, if it's just there's different transfer codes, we might want to put where the student is expected to go. When we have 8th graders that are matriculators, you want to complete the completion status, or high school completers, whether they're graduates or other type of completers, you want to populate the completion status. And then all of these fields as well are particular to high school students or students at 16 or older. We should talk about the student school transfer code. if you have an inter-district transfer or an intra-district transfer, you have the different transfer codes. And if, you don't have a public school of choice or a formal inter-district transfer, there's a code 6 here. And then if they're a transfer student, you populate the district graphic residence. Which district is their home district? And you match the 7-digit code for that district, okay? So these are for the students that are in your district on a transfer. So I'm gonna validate just like a file, right? The file validates all the information. It comes back and says in review. Well, you do it online, you validate, and then we'll be able to post this record. Oh no, I have errors. Invalid school for non-ADA enrollment status. And so again, this is not a private school. And I have a 50 non-ADA enrollment. I did not mean to do it, but it's a good way to look at the error. So I'm going to right click and open in a new tab to preserve this page. But when you do have an error, you can click it and it will take you to the user manual and it will tell you why your error triggered. If enrollment status code is 50, which it was, and the student grade level is KN, and we picked first grade, the student must be enrolled in a private school. Similar to what we read in the CFS. It's almost like I did that on purpose, right? It's almost like I did that on purpose. But between me and you, I didn't. I got lucky. So we're going to try to validate again. Fingers crossed. Successful. Good. So now we must post. And unfortunately, we have to scroll all the way back down to the bottom. Let me drag this over here so you guys can see better. And I'm just going to click post. And so if we have a lot of students, this is tedious. It's time consuming. Also, especially considering we've already did all this in our student information system. That's why batch file is more efficient, and we would encourage your batch file processing. However, if it's just one student, this is probably faster than submitting a file and waiting hours in a queue for it to be processed. So we've completed the student enrollment, right? We can see that the student's enrollment record is here. We can see that a new SSID has been assigned. Next, we want to populate the demographic. The reason why is a lot of times we enroll the student in CALPADS and we go on to the next student. Enroll the student in CALPADS and go on to the next student. And we're doing this with a specific objective in mind. Maybe we want the students to be in CALPADS so that they can be tested, right, for ELPAC. The problem is your student won't come up for ELPAC testing without other requirements. And one of those is your student information, the demographic information. And of course, also, which Kyron will talk about, your student English language, right? But even for direct search students, we get them enrolled and we don't know why they're not coming up. Well, what's CALPADS matching their information to, right? It needs that demographic information in addition to a name, right? It might need the student's address, might need the student's parenting information for to match the students if they're on Medicaid or Medicare, or if they're a foster youth student, right? And so we need that demographic information to be populated. And that's why we stress completing the student's profile when you submit information. And so I think the key thing is you don't want to add a new record if you're doing it online, because it's going to create a record subsequent to this one. This is the record it's a shell record. It has only the information we've added from enrollment. We're going to open it and complete the rest of this record. And once we open it, we have to complete it in order to validate. So I'll just click validate and show you what I mean. Similar to submitting a file, if all the required fields are not populated, you will receive one or multiple error messages. So you can see that I'm missing the parent guardian education level. I'm also have invalid student Hispanic ethnicity indicator because we didn't indicate it. And so that is the sum total of required fields. Again, if we have middle name, we want to use it. If the student has an alias name, we can populate it here. You can see the student's birth date. the gender, the name. These are editable fields, right? So if the student was to incur a name change over the academic career, you'd go to the student information and update it. If the student's gender was to change between now and the time they graduate, this is where it will be updated. The one thing to know is you cannot change the name and the gender in a single transaction. It's either or. So if San Francisco becomes a male and Francisco isn't masculine enough and they change their name, I would first either change the name, validate and post, open it back up, and then change the gender, or the reverse, change the gender, validate and post, come back and change the name. Also, name changes and gender changes can only be done online. So even if you're just making a correction, there's been no gender change, it was just a typo, you have to go in and do that online, okay? And so we go through every field in great detail in the self-paced. And so Karen talked about the CSIS YouTube training channel. All the self-paced are here. There's a whole module on student enrollment and then a whole module on student information, so on and so forth. And if you're brand new, you can go through the basics first. We have a whole training on batch file submission, not specific to any one of these. All right. And then if you needed to go to anomalies training, when I hit it towards mids, all these are longer and dedicated to a single topic. Again, the point of this training is to do the complete process. And so it's going pretty fast. So we know that Hispanic ethnicity indicator is required. Either student indicates yes or no, right? Or below it, it's missing. So we'll just say, yes, it's missing. We can type in 1 up to 5 different race codes, right? So you can see the different race codes that we have here. These are federal. Just important to note, they're not related to country codes, so to speak. There's different federal races. But if it's not given to us, we put race code missing, right? We're not trying to determine if our students have Hispanic ethnicity or if they're a particular race, when it might seem obvious to us. If the parents provide that information, we populate it. If not, it's missing, right? It does make it difficult if that information is not provided in the long run to use that as matching information, right? And then parent guardian information. This is the only required field down here under parent guardian is their highest education level code, right? And you have the different codes. It's important to note that not a high school graduate would automatically identify the student as a socioeconomically disadvantaged student. That's Fall 1 report 1.1 and 1.2. We have other groups of disadvantaged students like reports 1.17 and 1.18. However, this field does not come into play in that report, right? Only on 1.1 and 1.2 does this and again, it's a federal report and this is a federal definition. So this student can be a millionaire, right? Nate Holmes, which is me, dropped out of high school, became $1 million rapper. My kids have everything. They go to school in a Rolls Royce. They eat seafood lasagna brought to them by my butler at lunch, right? It doesn't matter because I didn't graduate high school. They're defined as socioeconomically disadvantaged. However, you have other codes to populate. So that's just an important field. That's a nuance of that particular field, right? And then if you do populate a parent's name, Randy, oops, forgot my D, right? You want to put first and last name. They've made validation changes in previous years. So if Pele is your parent and he goes by one name, you're out of luck. You have to put something there. One parent, these fields are not required, but if you do start populating a name, you have to populate the full name, okay? So just keep that in mind. Invalid student race code and ethnicity missing indicator combination. So let's look at that. And why is it invalid? Again, I'm going to open a new tab so we could come back. Invalid student race code and student race ethnicity indicator. We have our fields validated, right? And we have our description. The description reads, student race missing indicator must accurately reflect what is populated in the race code field. So the field validated is something I want to point out because this is where the discrepancy will be. It'll be between one of the 5 race code fields and the race code missing indicator. Suggested resolution. If at least one of the entries in a race code field should remain as correct entry for the SSID, change the student's race indicator to N or blank, indicate the student race code is not missing in the record. If none of the entries in student race code should remain correct entry SSID, change the student race code to Y and blank and indicate that the race is missing. So this isn't exactly English, right? Because it should read, if at least one of the race fields is populated, then the indicator should be no. Or if the indicator is no, none of the fields can be populated. So sometimes you have to read in between the lines, take your technical hat out, put it on, or you can, again, go back to the CFS because we know field requirements are there and look at race code and student information or the race code indicator. So here's a student race code, a coded value. Okay, we know what the race is. We'll scroll over to the right under validation. You can see it says validation. So we're going to come down here. If the race code missing indicator is equal to yes, then all of the race codes must be blank. If the student race code is null, then it's required. Okay, so that's more helpful than the error list. So I'm going to come here. All my fields are blank. That's fine. Race code missing indicator, no. Okay, that's my problem, right? So if it's not obvious, there's tools, there's guides, there's documents that will help you navigate through the errors. And if last but not least, you can always go under help in the left navigation, submit a service request ticket, and we'll be glad to help. And we're not mind readers, right? Sometimes you're frustrated and you don't provide all the information. If we ever respond and our response is not helpful, just elaborate on your problem. Say, I don't understand. Hopefully you're not rude, but if you say, Nate, this doesn't make any sense. I don't know what you're saying. You sound like training. I'll be like, okay, let me try better. My feelings will be hurt. I'll say some sarcastic things before I respond to you, but I will try to present myself as professionally as possible. And so the last thing I want to do is the address, and that is in the file part of the student information. It's combined with the demographics. However, in the module, it's by itself. And so I'm going to add a new record. And this is obviously not strictly required. As you see, we've enrolled a student, we've populated the information, but again, for matching purposes, it's important to populate the address. So we have our choice of effective start dates, right? Let me just pick a start date for the student, right? And residential address. So the address isn't validated, right? It's all the way up to you to be as accurate as possible. Because if you misspell the street name or the street number, the address, if it's ever used, I don't know if it's used or not for determining where to send PBT cards, but if it's used for that purpose, the students' access to their PBT card may be solely up to how accurately this is populated in CALPADS. That's just an example. Again, I'm not entirely sure that's where the address, how the address is being used. So then the city, we said Tracy. And then again, I just want to point out CALPADS does not validate zip codes, right? It's just going to make sure there's 5 digits here, and that's it. Now, if the mailing address is different from the residential address, you can populate the mailing address. It does not have to be populated. Like most other forms that you populate, this is optional. If it's different, you populate it. If you do populate one field, you do have to complete the city and the zip, okay? But if you leave it blank, it will validate and be fine, assuming the rest of your information is correct. And so I didn't populate the state. Okay. Let's try again. And I will post. So I did try to generate a GER5. That's a general error. Maybe Kyron can do it better than I. But I am not comfortable with this effective start date. I'll be honest with you. Typically, with records dependent on or depending on your enrollment and your ownership, and I'll try to demonstrate that. The start date was 9/6/2021, but evidently the address is not. It does not matter. It allowed me to start at 9/1/2021.
Everything's allowed now, Nate.
So
that should have triggered a GER5.
I was like, but there you go, right? And I will post. So, like I said, Kyron, good luck. You have better file options that we know will trigger. And the GER5 is a common error, so it's good if we could ever demonstrate it. And so, with that, we've completed the student enrollment and student information, and those are very important fields to create and start your student profile. If you ever enroll a student, please also get the student information submitted the same day. Only because even if you're going to submit other files or populate other student data later, like the SELA status or the program, at least CALPADS can perform matching once those records are posted, if it's in a file or if you're doing it online. You have the very basics, the enrollment, and then this personal information for the student.
So the third file that we will be discussing and demoing is the Student English Language Acquisition file, SELA. So this contains the English language or even the ELAS status of a student to determine if a student needs EL services or is fluent or is initially fluent during testing. And if a student's home language survey is not speaking English, then LAs would then code the student as TBD, which then triggers CALPADS to send the data to TOMS and puts the student in the test roster for initial ELPAC testing. So here are the codes that normally you would use for the SELA record. So you have your EO, TBD, ADEL, IFF, EL, and RFF. Okay, so the ADEL is for students who are age 22 or older, whose home language survey says they're foreign speaking. However, since you can't test a student beyond 22 years old for ELPAC, they are automatically reported as ADEL. And this, your EO, TBD, ADEL, and RFEP can be sent or self-reported by the LEA through a batch file or through online maintenance and sent to CALPADS. The EL and IFEP can no longer be sent by an LEA. This will actually be sent by TOMS back to CALPADS after a student completes testing. Okay, so here's the normal ELAS status change. So I just want to emphasize this because in our discussion, I will be showing you some, let's say, corrections or changes that needs to be done. So if your reporting of the student's ELAS follows this sequence here, like from home language surveys, the student is determined as speaking a foreign language, then the student should be flagged as TBD and will be tested. And then TOMS will send either an EL code or IFF code to CALPADS. Now, if let's say on a home language survey, the student is EO, then you can just directly report the student as EO. Now, if let's say later on the student was EO and a teacher says, hey, this student might need some EL services. And so if that's the case, you then report the student as TBD after the EO, and then that puts the student in the roster list for ELPAC testing. Okay, and then RFEP is the eventual endpoint for an EL student. So if a EL student is tested during the summative period of testing, which is the later part of the year, and is considered to be fluent, then you will report in CALPADS and RFEP status. Now, let's say you have an EL student who has been EL for quite some time. He's 21, is still enrolled in California, and at some point, he turns 22. At that point, you are forced to report an ADEL for that student. So in the submission period, that where CALPADS catches the student as an EL and beyond 22 and above, then a certification error will force you to report the student as ADEL. Okay. So this is the cycle. And let's say if for some reason you want to change the student status from EL to EO or IFEP to EO, then this is where you need to have a correction code, and you only can make the corrections by doing online maintenance, okay? Which is the demo I'll be doing right now. But I can't basically create an EL and send it back to EO. But if you do need that, you need a correction code to report to CALPADS. So enough of that, and let's do the demo for SELA. So why are we doing the SELA first instead of the SPRG? In the sense of efficiency, you have a timeline or a deadline to meet for all of your EL students to be counted for CALPADS. I would recommend you send up your SELA first so that all of those TBD records or students would be tested and you would get the results back. Okay, so let's look at one student here. So I have a student already. I already created the SSID enrollment and SINF. And so I just paste the student's SSID here in the quick search, click on the green button, and it should bring up the result fairly quickly. Okay, so we have here Jimny Dean. Okay, Jimny Dean enrolled on 9/1/2021. Okay, and so this student is apparently foreign born and is attending classes at the district level. Okay, so now I see that the home language survey shows the student as Spanish speaking. So I click on student English language here. I add a new record. And I put a acquisition start date of, let's just say, the home language survey was received around October 3rd, August 30. Okay. And then the acquisition status code is TBD. I need to test this student. And Spanish. Sounds good to me. So looks good to me. And so I click on validate. Invalid TBD English language acquisition status code. Okay, so I click on this. And it says here, students who are aged 22 years or older cannot be TBD. So the fields being validated by CALPADS is the birth date, the status date, and the start date. So essentially, it's stating that the student is over 22 or 22 or over, and so you shouldn't be using a TBD. If that's the case, what code should we be using? Is there if you guys can chime in on the actual code we need to use? Well, I go back here. So I X that, close this, and I see the student. Turns out the birth date is 6/1/1999. And so yes, Vicky, you're correct. This should be an ADEL, straight out in ADEL, because the student is 22 during the time of reporting. So you're correct. So we use ADEL instead, and then we don't put any correction reason code here because we're not correcting a prior record anyway. So leave that blank. You only use this when you need to correct a prior status. So we have A30, ADEL, Spanish, and validate. And it looks like GER5 isn't working in test because normally if you have a status date before the enrollment date, this would trigger a GER 5 because obviously you don't have ownership of the student before 9/1. But I guess our test environment isn't catching GER 5s. Okay, it says here now, invalid adult English learner code, English status code. Why? Click on that. Students who are designated ADEL must be age 22 or older and enrolled in grades KN to 12. Okay, so what's the grade level on this? We have 12. We have ADEL, and it's 22 or older. So I validate again, and I get the same error. And we don't have a defect. So I guess, okay, so here's the case. We've made sure that the dates are correct, the conditions are correct. So what is your next step here? If you figured out, if you're sure that this record should not have triggered a SELA 524, what would you do? The answer is you send in a service ticket to CALPADS and have support investigate, because obviously this is a defect. So I can't use a TBD and I can't use an ADEL. So there's obviously something broken in the system. Is the status start date correct? Maybe let's check. Maybe that might trigger it. That's a good point. Let's say, let's just match it to 9/1. Actually, the status date, Lydia. Imagine that. That shouldn't be the error that it should have triggered. It's a known issue. So normally that would have triggered a GER 5 instead of a 525. So that's something we need to send up to our developers, but obviously that corrected the issue. And so, which is really strange.
It's nice to watch you fail, Kyron.
Yeah,
That's why it's called test.
Yep. So
Good job.
it's one thing. I'll be knocking on the developer's door after this training. So for the sake of submitting ADEL, let's just yes, you're right. You can have a status start date before enrollment date, and so normally that would trigger a GER 5, and maybe, and I'm not sure, based on the code, it doesn't say that it should be before this. So this is normally based on the birth date. It compares the birth date and the start date, not the effective start date. So that's something that we need to send up to our developers. Okay, so we post this and we're successful. Let's just pretend we've successfully submitted an ADEL record for the student, which is the case anyway. So now the student is ADEL. Okay, so that's how to submit a SELA record. So now let's have another one. So let's have another student just to show you another example. So this student, inspiration 4. So you have 9/1 as a start date, and we go to English language acquisition. So based on the home language survey, the student is EO. So we just use the first day of school, or let's just try, I'm just curious if GER 5 would trigger this time. So if it's EO, the primary language should be English, okay? See, it didn't trigger Nate. So we have something going on. So we just we just post this, and we have an EO student. So let's say a week after, the teacher says, hey, you got this student wrong. Okay. this student should be tested, because obviously she can't keep up with our class. And so we say, okay, we'll do that. Let's just put a TBD. Okay, so we now add a record. So let's say its status date is today. We have an English code of TBD, and it turns out the student can only speak, let's say Filipino. Okay, and then do we need a correction code on this? Anyone? Because we're correcting a prior record. Let's see. Let's validate that. And it doesn't. Okay. Why? Because following this, you have an EO going back to TBD. It doesn't require a correction code. Okay. Okay. So let's go back to the SELA and click on post. So that's the way to submit a SELA record or post a SELA record in CALPADS. Again, there are documents that you need to refer to that might help you. One is the CFS spreadsheet that Nate has been using. Another one is, so let me just show you the spreadsheet for SELA. So just right click on the spreadsheet, go to, where's SELA here? SELA, and you have all of the fields and when those fields are required. Another one is the valid code combinations document. So let's say if you're making corrections to these SELA records, you just right click on this arrow here on the valid code combinations document, go to correction codes. Okay, and you have the correction codes here. However, you have to make sure that you only see or show the valid ones this year. So filter for just NA on the last academic effective year. So these are the sequence that would only require you a SELA. So you have your EL to EO, EL to IFEP, IFEP to EO, IFEP to EL, and this has to be corrected. So just this ones here, 4 and 5, this ones, okay? And this ones you don't need to, because once you don't have to have TBD. I think this has to be updated. The first 4 needs to be gone. Just this 4 here should be used. Okay. So that's for SELA. Any questions so far? What if you have an EL needing to go back to TBD? For what particular reason? Scott, is it because the student is EO? If that's the case, the code would be EL to TBD instead. So you have EL to EO. Just go online to CALPADS and change that to EO. So you just have to go to the students. Let's just say, let's use the other one. So you've incorrectly entered as EL on enrollment. Okay. You actually the EL now on enrollment. That once you have a TBD, the students get tested, and now you want it to be an EO. You can do that. You just have to go back and say that the student is where's the ADEL one? Is just create a new record here. So let's just assume this is an EL. This is an EL. Just create a new record. Put the date should be later than that record, and then you have an EL. You choose one of those codes. So if it's in home language survey error, and then put the primary language, or if let's say you have an EO, so from EL, so home language survey error, and then the primary language of English. Oh, okay, no, this one, it should be ineligible student tested. Okay, 4. And that should work. Okay. Make sure though that the status start date is after the is a date after that EL start date. Okay. It shouldn't be before, it shouldn't be equal to the EL because you'll get an error. That's how to correct. Okay, another one. In your example, what if another LA has entered the EO? Shouldn't that SELA record be honored since the students are only supposed to be surveyed once? Yes, but then of course, sometimes your the survey can be done is done once. However, there are times, rare times when your a teacher would say that this student really doesn't speak English, and so they refer them to the school secretary, or then you guys talk and discuss and talk to the EL person, and then the EL person then clarifies um, or what do you call this, or test the student maybe, or converse with the student if they and sometimes they make the call, okay, that okay, this student doesn't really know English at all, and so and the home language survey was incorrectly reported as EO, then you have the authority to test the student. You don't need to have a survey for that EO. So that's the point. Okay, so yeah, so that's the EL. And so now that we have, let's say, identified the students, the EL came back before census day, and now we're ready for the next file, which is the SPRG. The SPRG file, let me go back here. Let's go back to our slide. Where's our slide? Okay, let's go back to SPRG. So the SPRG file contains all of this information, possible eligibilities that the students are reported for. So you have your free meal, reduced price meal based on the income verification form. You have your GATE, migrant, ed student, TK student, homeless student, tribal foster youth student. So all of these are collected, expected for fall 1. These are the ones counted on the reports if you've submitted eligibility. And to submit eligibility, you have to submit the SPRG file. And since we're doing online maintenance, we have to create an SPRG record for our students, right? And so we've determined that we have students who might be TK or might be tribal foster youth or homeless or any of this. So we'll just add one of those here. But take note too that the dates of this program eligibilities will matter on what CALPADS will collect in your certified data. So make sure any homeless student that is actively enrolled on census day, which is 10/6 this year, and with the homeless record before census day, on or before census day, will be collected. And that's the same thing for migrant ed. And then if a foster youth was matched with the date before census and overlap census, then that's also reported. And then you have all of your NSLP eligibility. So if you have your income forms received on or before October 31st, if all of the requirements are met and the date stamp October 31st, regardless if the verification came back eligible for free lunch, let's say in November, as long as the date stamp was October 31st or earlier, you can backdate that program. Okay. Okay, so moving on to programs. So we had those two students. So we have, let's do our ADEL person first. So Jimmy Dean, sounds like breakfast, was ADEL, okay? And then it turns out the student is homeless, okay? So now, again, if you're a big school, online maintenance is not the best way to report students. Okay, you have to submit a batch file, but if it's just one-offs, then do that directly in online maintenance. So go to student program, add a new record. And these are the fields required. Okay, so you have your school of attendance. So since we have that in here, it's easy to see. So the student is enrolled at the district. And then I mentioned the student is homeless. So let's just do homeless. And we determined that the student was homeless around November 8th. So let's try to, I'm just curious. Let's trigger a GER 5. Let's see. Okay. Enrollment start date is 1. Membership start date is before enrollment. So this supposedly should trigger a GER 5. If that doesn't happen, then I'm really going to knock on the developer's doors. So we have here 831. And then there are additional requirements for when reporting homeless program records. So you have here your homeless dwelling type. Okay. So these are the homeless dwelling types. If you are unsure of what to pick, the CALPADS code sets will help you with that choice. So let me just see if I have the CALPADS code sets here. Okay, the CALPADS code sets. If you okay, should have opened that earlier. Okay, so we have the CALPADS code sets here. So on our, it says homeless dwelling type. Okay, so let's look at homeless. We go to CALPADS code sets, and then under code set name, homeless. I'm just guessing, and I see homeless dwelling types. I click on OK. So these are the examples. This is the specific description of this information. Okay, and then I believe there are some additional information for homeless in the CALPADS data guide. Okay, the CALPADS data guide can be downloaded at the bottom of CALPADS. So let's just bring up another CALPADS window here. So at the bottom here on the footer, if you get out of this, on the footer there is a CALPADS data guide option, or you can go to the user manual, go to references, and then look for the data guide here. Here, click on that. And so we have the data guide open, and we have, let's look at programs. So we have program here. Then you have all of the different programs. Okay. So the data guide also provides additional information on programs, the conditions of homeless. See all of this, when to close it, what other homeless programs, what are the eligibilities. So all of these are here. So I think there was something here about homeless, I believe. I guess not. They took it out. Okay.
It's there.
It's there. Let me just go
But
back.
homeless might be in student populations and programs in chapter 3.
Chapter 3.
At the bottom.
Okay. Ah, yeah. There you go. See? Thank you, Nate. So homeless, and you have here for homeless, you have the different field elements you need. So starting this year, runaway youth indicator is no longer used. And so in the UI, if you notice, this indicator is gone. So, you don't have to populate this. However, where's that? So now we have the homeless dwelling type. Let's just say this, the student is temporarily doubled up, meaning the student is staying with a family member or a friend, or just um, in the meantime. And then now you have unaccompanied youth indicator. Um, Obviously, this student is not a youth because this is a 22-year-old student. And so just to be sure, let's see what it says for youth indicator. This is required for all homeless students. Once the indicator is set to Y, it should not be changed for the duration of the academic year. If the student is a runaway, then yes. Okay, so we need to populate this, but since this student is not a youth, then we just click on no. Okay. This needs to be populated either yes or no. Okay, so these are the two fields on top of the program code, the start date, school of attendance, and reporting LEA. This is what you need for homeless. So we click on validate. There we go. Success. We have a GER5 finally, Nate. So let's click on GER5. I was really hoping this triggered. So GER5 is just stating that you don't have ownership of the student. Okay. So it uses it didn't have a field it's validated here. So anyway, GER5. So ownership, what does ownership entail? You have to have ownership normally is based on the membership start date versus the enrollment start date, as well as reporting LEA. So since you're reporting it in the correct LEA, that isn't the problem. So the problem is this start date here. Okay, it should be on or after the enrollment start date. So let's change that to 1. Validate. Again. And okay, CALPADS. Okay, now this error is overzealous. 9/1/2021, 9/1/2021 homeless. So let's just put 9/16. Okay. So I guess we got what we wish for, a GER5, even though it is wrong. So this is the opposite. Okay, this is embarrassing, Nate. So now GER5 shouldn't have triggered after this because it's on or after census day, or on or after the enrollment start date. So I'm not sure why this is triggering a GER5, and so yeah, there's nothing I could say about this. So let's just pretend we posted this and it should be in CALPADS. Okay. Berkeley Unified, hi. Oh, there you go. There's our error. Did you if someone has some eagle eyes, what was the error? What triggered the GER5 in here?
I saw it.
Yeah, me too. Yes, Cami, you're the best. Okay. Yeah, it's the wrong school of attendance. So the fields validated by GER5 is the reporting LA, school of attendance, and enrollment start date versus the membership start date and school of attendance. Okay.
If I
So
could just jump in real quickly, Kyron. I had
yes,
a
sir.
similar issue the last training, and the GER5 on the error list didn't have the fields validated. I mean, in the user manual, but on the error list, there's two because the error trigger is so lengthy. The description takes two columns. So be careful if you're looking up the fields validated in the Excel version of the error list, which is in the footer of CALPADS. There's two rows of GER5 because it's so much information, because this error can trigger so much. But I'm just trying to help them get to the fields validated. That's all.
Okay. Thank you, Nate. So we have, there we go. Thank you. Post, and we now have a homeless record posted. Okay. So that's how to submit a SPRG record. And so if you look at the PowerPoint presentation, there are additional information that is relevant to SPRG reporting. You have here the dates. Be aware of the dates, just in case later on you would be wondering why the reports aren't picking up your students. And then I guess that's it. So yeah, so for the SPRG, that's how you report an SPRG to CALPADS. This slide identifies what other fields are required for a specific code. So take note of this. So you have migrant ID for migrant ed, and California Partnership ID, which is normally reported in end of year. And then Title 1 targeted 122, which is also end of year. So fields A, C are not normally required during fall 1 if you're not reporting these codes anyway. Title 1 targeted and California Partnership ID. So that's basically it for SPRG and SELA reporting. And so for special education, we don't normally demo this because we don't have access to your specific special education system, say CSIS and all of those stuff. But with regards to the key points, you just make sure that as a CALPADS administrator, you have ownership of the student. You maintain the ownership of the student at the specific school and the correct enrollment type. And that would then set the stage for proper reporting by your SPED person. Okay. Your responsibility to make right is the school of attendance. Is it NPS? Is it 002? If it's an enrollment type 50, is it primary enrollment or enrollment type 50? So all of those enrollment information is your responsibility. If you get that right, then you would set the stage for your SPED person to succeed as well. So I posted a link earlier on that about this one here. Reporting data for students with disabilities. So here are all the scenarios of the student. If it's infant, then you need to have a specific enrollment who is responsible to enroll the student. So use this, if you have a SPED student, use this as reference on determining how to report the student enrollment in CALPADS. And then later on, your SPED person will basically just handle the SPED side of the information. Okay. Do you want to add anything here, Nate? Some gotchas on SPED and SSRV?
Yeah, I will actually.
Okay, go ahead.
And before we do the wrap up, so Kyron was talking about, because in our test environment, our practice LEAs don't have associations to SELPAs, so we cannot simulate that data population. And so all the students we have that are in special ed records are copied student records from CALPADS. So we just change the student's information to make it fictitious so that we can protect that student's privacy. And so we have this character here who was enrolled at ABC Unified, and you can see the enrollment status is 50 for preschool. So that's wrong off bat. And if you go to the Students with Disabilities Data Population Training, Flash Message 161, or the CALPADS Data Guide, it's most likely even in the CALPADS FAQs, the proper way to enroll a preschool student, grade level PS, is to use enrollment status 10, which you see here. And so we just want to emphasize that's one of the things. Also, because we haven't talked about the students with disability data population training, that's also a resource, because as a LEA, all the data pertaining to students with disabilities does not come from your student or your special education system. Majority of the information, like their enrollment, their demographics, if they're in any programs, or as they complete their academic career, their course record, that's coming from the student information system. And so you will be updating and have to know details about these students as well. And one of the marriages is between the enrollment record and the special education or SSRV file. So knowing the proper way to enroll your students, as we talked about, is very important. If you want to look at those records as they live in CALPADS, you want to go to special education for the special education program, or the special education services for those associated services. Each one of these special education meeting identifiers should match services if it's a meeting code 20, 10, or 15. If it's a 40 and the name was changed, we used to call them triennials, now they're called evaluation name, that would not have a service, nor would a pending record. But every meeting, this identifier, every annual meeting or initial meeting, the identifier should match corresponding service record. What services are you providing the student that, since they are eligible? You know, you want to be familiar with the different types of plans, because enrollments are dictated by the plan. So a student with the ISP with education plan type code 200, when you look at their enrollment, if they have an ISP, the school of attendance has to be private school, the 6 zeros followed by the 2, and the enrollment status has to be 50. And you will see errors triggering that you have to go to the enrollment record to correct, or it's an indication that this special education information is incorrect. And then the last thing I want to point out here before we get into our wrap up is there's limited functionality with special education, with the service and the program records. So if anything needs to be updated in student special education or student services, CALPADS cannot do it. It cannot do it through a file update. It cannot do it through a online. The functionality requires you to delete that record and then submit a new one and through your SED system. So, you know, I don't know the training your SEDS data coordinators have, but in your case, if there's a discrepancy between a student being in private school and their enrollment record, and you know your student is enrolled in a public school at your district, and they confirm, okay, yeah, you're right, it was an ISP, now it's an IEP, our special education record's incorrect, they would delete the special education record and submit a new one once making those changes. So the functionality, the limitations is you cannot edit any of these fields. I'm clicking and you can see it's not allowed. All I could do is delete this record, submit a new one in its place. Sometimes that requires deleting that record and the corresponding service, and then submitting a new special education program record and a new service record to ensure that they are married by a special education meeting amendment identifier. And so, like Kyron said, we apologize because we have limited functionality. There's not too much we can demonstrate in special education as far as data population. And typically, as an LEA data coordinator, your role comes into play, unfortunately, in troubleshooting. And it was, we all know, fixing someone else's mess is more difficult than fixing our own mess. So we have exactly 1 minute. So this is going to be a speed wrap up, okay? Which is my specialty. Key points: the enrollment record must be posted first to establish ownership. So when you submit a student enrollment file, complete the process, or if you submit a student enrollment update, validate and post. Once it's posted, those records are in CALPADS, and then you can submit the associated information. Sometimes we get it jump the gun. When the validation passes, we think we're good. We didn't do the final step of posting. We submit other records and we get errors. Always post the enrollments, and then you can submit the additional information. Demographic information is required for all students, for state level matching at the very least, right? Among other things, though, so you can't just enroll your students, expect them to come up on your ELPAC students to be tested or your direct certification results. The demographic information is needed in the very least. In case of ELPAC, you also need to submit the SELA data. Complete student profiles generally is the best way to go. Do not update a student's ELAS status or SELA status if it already exists in CALPADS. Only initial, right, the result of the home language survey or a change, student going from EL to RFEP or from RFEP to ADEL, should be submitted once established. The only initial statuses would be IFEP and TBD. Initial ELPAC results would be, EO and TBD. Initial ELPAC results will be EL and IFEP. Students aged 22 or older must have their status changed to ADEL from RFEP. Program eligibility is counted if your program start date is or on census day, right? So your migrant students, your homeless students, they'll show up on LCFF reports if that record is effective on the official census day, which is that one day that we're looking for students' information. And then the SPED and SSRV files are submitted via the SED system, your special education system, not your student information system to the API. So this slide is reference. We just want you to be able to certify by Thanksgiving. And that's not an official deadline. That's just our advice because it gives yourself a time to approve the data by the initial deadline. If you go to our subsequent fall data certification, you'll see this. So that's it. Going forward, your next training should be Fall 1 reporting certification, advanced. If you're experienced, if you're new, go to the regular Fall 1 reporting certification training. We showed you many resources and where to get them. So if you're looking for support, contact the service desk. Here's a hierarchy of support. We encourage you to use the web form at the top. It's the fastest, most direct way to get the guys and gals at the service desk. If you should want someone specific like Kyron or Marshall or Slyman, just put in the subject line, attention Kyron, attention Slyman, attention Marshall. It'll be routed to them. You can email us as well. It just takes a little bit longer. And then if you do call us, it works opposite as you would expect. Many people call us in desperation. The number goes to an automatic voicemail. That voicemail is transcribed to an email. Once the email is queued up, it is sent to the service desk, right? So if you are absolutely desperate, the web form is the fastest way to get help. Then the listserv at the bottom is different from the CALPADS listserv. I would advise you to subscribe to both. The CALPADS listserv gets you those flash messages, those letters from the superintendent. The listserv here is the CSIS listserv, which is hosted on our servers. And it's just a way for LEAs to communicate with each other. Sometimes CSIS or CDE staff will chime in. So last but not least, Marshall just posted the survey in the chat box. And like we said in the beginning, please give us a survey, a response, whether you enjoyed training, it was beneficial, whether or not it wasn't. Please tell us why. Either way, what's the impact on you or the value to you by dividing the two trainings at once. And of course, we try to do that because you see, we went the full 2 hours. And if we had to do the batch file portion, it would be longer. So you can understand why we try to divide the two, although it may require more attendance from you. We apologize for that. So any and all surveys are welcome and we are begging for them, please. And so last, we want to say thank you.